Recently, during research administrator office hours at the Optimum department, we had a question pop up, which I thought was like so delicious that I wanted to actually record a video on it. It's basically what I said in office hours, but in a video format. So somebody asked, what are like the big lessons? You know, if I was to give a new research administrator like some of my big lessons, like what are my 5? And it's funny, I thought of 5 then, but then like as I was making the list afterwards, I thought of 6. So I'm going to give you my 6 things that I have realized over the years that are like has helped me. So the first one is nothing is unfixable. So my early on in my career, my boss, Jennifer Sabag, brilliant woman who taught me so much about being a research administrator. I remember I used to worry about everything all the time. I was constantly worried about making a mistake. And, you know, our jobs are very, very specific. They're compliance heavy. We don't really have the freedom to make a lot of mistakes, right? That's fine. That's what I love about the job. But at the same time, I have anxiety. And so for me, like that kind of created this loop of, oh my God, like I'm constantly anxious about doing something wrong, right? So I'm constantly anxious about it, right? And what ultimately ended up happening was that my fear was so palpable and it was so deep that it was keeping me from actually doing a good job because I was like paralyzing myself with fear. And so my boss, actually, I remember vividly her telling me, she's like, Vanessa, nothing is unfixable. Nothing is unfixable. And you can fix anything. Even if you make a mistake, do your best, the best that you can to be as correct as you can. But if you do make a mistake, you can fix it, right? And that was very, very, impactful for me. The recognition that I could fix, that I had what it took to fix whatever problems I was going to find. That actually then elucidated later on. This is why, as I developed in my career, I started to really enjoy crisis management because I started to find that when you stop being afraid of what you're going to find, because you realize no matter what I find, whether I'm taking over a new portfolio or I've picked up one that while I was away or I found a mistake that I made, whatever it is, don't be afraid of what you'll find because you can fix whatever you find. And that creates an enormous amount of freedom and empowerment and confidence because you're like, you know what? It doesn't matter what I find. I will be able to fix it. I know I can do this. And if I don't know the answer, then I have it in my resource, in my toolkit to be able to find someone who can guide me into the answer. The second thing is organization and systems are critical. There is no amount of brute forcing work that is going to compensate for having poor organizational and management systems for your emails, for your workflow, for your workload, for your reconciliations, for your submissions, for whatever it is. You have to have a strong organization system. Having Post-its just laying all over the place in and of itself is not a system. Many people have turned those Post-its into a systemic process for sure, but simply the act of having Post-its does not create a system that will allow you to continuously make progress. In fact, it's going to create an opportunity where you get a situation where you literally get buried in your Post-its. So your Post-its just, oh my God, I'm just buried on my Post-its. So you need to have organization and systems. This can be a paper system. It can be a operational system. It can be a checklist system. People's brains work very, very differently. The key element is it does need to be a system. It needs to have a flow of some kind, and it needs to be simple and straightforward. A lot of times people will create these organizational systems that are so ridiculously complicated that simply maintaining the system itself takes all of your time. If that's what you're doing, then you end up spending all your time on that. So organization and systems are critical, but don't iterate yourself into the point where all you're doing is working on your system. What I would recommend if you don't already have an organization system is to head over to Manessa.tv and check out the Commitment to Clock Out series, where I basically hand you my system for how do I manage giant portfolios, how do I manage multiple competing priorities with pre and post award. We are also managing compliance and people's expectations. There is an entire series there that will help you through figuring out what some of the frameworks can be that you can use, and then you can adapt it to what works for you. Number 3, you will not remember. You will not remember. You will not remember. You won't remember. Write it down. You won't remember. You won't remember. You think you will. You'll say you will. You'll be sure you will. You won't. Always, always, always take notes. Put notes in your recon spreadsheet. Put notes in your project manager. I use Asana to manage my workflow. I put all my notes in there. You have to have notes, because you will not remember 6 months down the line when someone asks you a question about this grant. You won't remember why you did what you did. Some things are so strong that you're positive. You're like, I will never forget this. And then 6 months down the line, you have forgotten it. And you're like, shoot, I should have written this down. So you will not remember. You will not remember. You will not remember. Write it down. This one is a big one. Questions are a sign that you're getting it. They're not a sign that you're not getting it. So when you're in training and your manager is working with you and they're teaching you something, you may not have any questions right away. I tend to hear, process, and then come back with the questions later. I typically am like a deer in headlights when I first hear something, but I always have the questions eventually, right? I know how I learn now, so I can actually say, listen, I'm going to take this information in, I'm going to process it, then I'm going to come back with questions. There was a period where I did not know that about myself, right? I just knew that when people would give me a whole bunch of things, they'd be like, yeah. And then I would have questions later, right? And then they would ask me, well, why didn't you ask me the questions when I asked you if you had questions? Well, I didn't have questions then, right? So the first thing to keep in mind is it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask questions whenever you need to ask them because people learn differently. But don't be afraid to ask questions because you think it'll make you look like you don't know what you're doing. If you don't ask any questions at all, you look like either you are overconfident, which in some cases may be valid. If you don't have any questions, then it looks like you're actually not getting it because you're not understanding it enough to be able to ask questions. I have been doing this for 25 years. I still have questions, right? So it is very important to recognize that this is a job of questions. Our job is the job of curiosity and questions. So having them is a good thing. So whenever you have the opportunity, ask them. There will always be more work. There will always be more work. Clock out, disconnect, and engage. Going back to the Commitment to Clock Out series, part of its purpose is to help research administrators engage with the jobs that they love so much, do the work that they love so much, but also be able to clock out, put that work down, and then go do other things that they love so much. Do things that fulfill them in a different way. Do things that do not involve work, right? So, but it's very, very hard to do. It is incredibly hard to do when there's so much work. There's constantly new grants coming in, new problems to solve, new things that need to be fixed, new questions to be answered. There's always new emails that are coming in, constant barrage of something needs to get done, something needs to get fixed, something needs to get found. Even though that is the case, that is the nature of the job. That's never going to change. There is not going to be a point at which you say, yes, I have finished. I feel like I'm confidently going to put this away and I'm going to leave, because the second you turn around, another email will come. Work stops when you decide that it stops. So the challenge is actually not so much feeling like there's enough, that you've gotten everything into a place where, okay, now I can do it, right? Because that's not going to happen. It's recognizing when that is for you that you're ready, and how do you put systems in place to allow you to clock out, disconnect, and disengage. That's a challenge, right? None of us are conditioned into that, and none of us have been trained how to do that. We have been taught how to work longer, work more, work better, work harder, work faster. We have not been taught to stop and rest. And how do you take that time for yourself? So that is really important, because as much as the job is fun, and I love this job, you can burn out on it. And because there is always more work, there's always more to be had. So you will always be able to have this fun. The key is making sure that you are giving yourself the space to heal from the work, so that you can then come back, right? It's sort of like working out. If you go to the gym and you're just constantly working out that same muscle and you never give it a chance to rest, eventually you're going to tear the muscle, right? I don't work out, but I definitely know that's true. Same thing is true for work. Lastly, networking and building relationships is going to be a fundamental part of your career. Research administration is such a delightful community of people. I absolutely love the spectrum of experiences and the rich histories that come into research administration, both on the academic side, on the industry side, on the research administration side, from students to PIs. I very much love that tapestry. The network of people that you meet over the course of your career, you will run into again and again over the years. These are the relationships that become your references. They become your colleagues. They become your resources. They become your think tank. They become your biggest cheerleaders, and you become theirs. So one of the things that I recommend is immediately join the National Council for University Research Administrators. Join your region, find your region and join it. and volunteer. Then start to volunteer for NCURA. If you're not sure how to volunteer, let me know. I can talk. If you're not sure how to volunteer, you're welcome to reach out to me, and we can definitely talk about it. NCURA is an incredible place to build relationships outside of your organization, because typically it is possible. It's fairly straightforward to build relationships within your organization, but trying to build outside of your organization and then a little bit further out can be more challenging. These are the things that when I think about research administration, I think about both being told some of these things before when I first started, and then also learning them a few times and seeing how they played out and being like, oh, when something happens, you're like, this happened because I was a member of NCURA. Yep, thanks, that's paying me dividends. Thanks, past me. Or days where I have a really heavy workload and I'm feeling like overwhelmed because there's so much work to do. And I'm like, you know what, I'll just do one more thing. And then I'm like, no, wait, there will always be more work, right? These clock out, disconnect, disengage. These are the things that keep paying dividends over and over and over and over again in my career. And I very much feel like I get a lot of value out of them. I would love to hear, because the truth is these are my 5. There are probably hundreds more, and each research administrator sort of has their own lessons and life lessons that they have learned over the years that they too mark those moments where they're like, oh yeah, I learned this and I see myself applying it now. And the joy that comes from saying, I remember the first time I didn't apply this, and now here I am like 10, 15 years later applying this now. I would love to hear what your experience with that has been for you, like lessons that you remember learning it the first time and you're like, oh my God, this is so painful, like this sucks. And then now when you have a moment where you sort of apply that thing and you're like, oh yeah, I remember the first time and now it's so easy because I've been doing it for so long. And there's a moment there where you're like, give yourself the pat on the back of growth, of like something that past you would have found difficult, current you finds fairly straightforward and easy. And that's a really incredible thing. I would love to hear more about it.